Hi guy, welcome to the Amigarama podcast. I'm your host Lefarius, and in this week's show, which is our 64th, we are going to take a deep dive into RoboCop. But let's take a moment to have a look at some of this week's Amiga news. Now, first up is a brand new Amiga game that came out over Christmas called Tiger Claw. Now, I have mentioned this before, but the great thing about it is there's a free PC version, which I have been playing to some degree, and I'm tempted to live stream it at some point. Oh, by the way, I do have a live streaming page up on the Amigarama site now. I have only done a couple of shows so far, but I'm hoping to do more and more as I get more time to do these things. And Tiger Claw is right up there as a game I'm hoping to cover. If you go to the download site and select the donate option and give them $2.99, they will actually give you a Amiga ADF format, which will work on all emulators. You can even burn it to a floppy disk if that's your thing. Now you might wonder, oh, well, what is this Tiger Claw? Sorry, I should have said, shouldn't I? It's effectively a sort of semi-gameplay style sequel to the original Bruce Lee game. It's that sort of running, jumping, hitting and bashing things around. It's got this full style world. It's not a direct sequel per se, but it just uses the game elements and the platforming and the way that game was with the awesome fighting and the jumping and the climbing and the stuff and the collecting. It looks great. It's a lot of fun and they've done a really good job. It's got things like a retro mode and an up-to-date graphics version as well. It's really neat. So it's free on PC or you can pay for the Amiga version. Whichever way you go, it's well worth playing because I've been having loads of fun with it. Next up is something that really slipped under my radar. Galahad from Fairlight, who has previously converted Where Time Stood Still to the Amiga, recently released an Amiga port of the ST platformer Starquake. Now it's A1200 only at the moment, but the plan is to release a working A500 version. You can also pick up a box copy from Retro Fusion. As usual, I will stick links to both sites into the show notes. I'm afraid I've not played it, though I have looked at it quite closely, a few videos and things. It does look really good. It's like a 8-bit specky game converted over to 16-bit, so you've got all sorts of crazy graphical enhancements, and it's a proper decent classic style platformer. Anyway, I think it's well worth picking up. It's getting some very good and favourable reviews everywhere. It always amazes me that still to this day there's brand new Amiga games actually being released on a regular basis. And of course I'm really glad because it gives us more to talk about each week. And to be honest, there's that many games coming out each year, I could probably do special episodes on a collection of them together. Hell, if that's what you guys want, drop me a line or let me know in the usual place. It's time to jump into this week's game, RoboCop. Now, this isn't one I actually played much of as a kid. If anything, I got plenty of chances to play the arcade original, which I was a huge fan of. I still am to this day. One of the first main games I will ever play when I either set up a new system or play things like on the Raspberry Pi is RoboCop. I mean, it's absolutely fantastic. It nails that feeling of the movie and the way, well, he is a robot and the way he moves and the shooting and the fun and the action and stuff. It's just a perfect representation of the movie that it's based on. So I was very interested to see that Ocean had been involved in a movie tie-in game, especially when they'd done the likes of Batman. And this has always stood out in my mind because I do remember as a kid when it came to the movie. I mean, I must have been 6 or 7 when did the film come out? Was that 85, 86? My first experience of it when I was, let's say, 6 or 7 My dad was into these sort of films and always bought them on VHS and stuff, because I always remember stuff like him having Batman around the house and later on RoboCop. And he actually bought this on VHS and he was chuffed to bits and he said he loved it 2 bits. I was completely banned from watching it. And at the time I was gutted because the toy companies were doing that thing where they were pushing stuff like crazy and it was all over the media and this really over the top actiony sci-fi film, and I was missing out and I was itching to see it. The video was sat there forever and I was constantly wanting to see it and pestering away, and then I don't know what happened. I think I was being babysat by somebody. Again, I was about 6 or 7 years old and I sat there and watched this entire film. You might think, oh well, it's not too bad. But there's this specific section where Murphy gets gunned down and it's so over the top, ultra violent. And I can remember being sat there like that age. Eyes were like saucers and I was blown away. And I'll admit there that it did actually give me nightmares for a good while, so it was probably a good idea that my parents were pushing for me not to see this film. And they found out when they came home because they spoke to the babysitter, and I got in so much trouble off the back of it. But I'd seen it. I'd seen RoboCop and it started this lifelong love of wanting to see this movie. And at the moment I've got it on Laserdisc, I've got Blu-ray, I've got the DVD box set knocking around. I love this film. It's an absolute classic. As a must, it had to be covered on the show. As I said before, it was published by Ocean, who did games like A-Train, and I promise we will do a show on that eventually. I need to tackle that one properly though, I'm just not sure how I'm going to do it. They did Alien Breed 3D, or rather they published it, I'm not sure what happened there. I always thought Team 17 just did that stuff on their own. Anyway, that side, Burning Rubber, Cabal. I do actually want to cover that one. I think that's a shooter. Is it a bit like Operation Wolf? Not sure. F-29 Retaliator. Again, we need to do some sort of flight sim at some time. Again, it's that amount of time and effort they need for me to sit there with these Bible-like manuals and actually work out what the hell's going on. Ivanhoe was another one, Batman the movie, etc. So, you know, there were tons and tons of movie licensed games, original games. Ocean were absolutely massive back in the day. Now, they were also the developer as well, so we'll skip over that part. Now, this came out in 1989. It was on just one floppy disk and it was only for one player. Now, it was priced at around £24.99, which is probably around $30 in the US. If you're wondering why I keep mentioning the prices, it's mainly because it's just interesting. If you look at big games today, they're all priced around £30 to £40. Something like the special edition, I mean, completely different to what you had back then. I mean, the special editions for the Amiga, like Shadow of the Beast comes to mind, that was around £35 and you got like a t-shirt in and a big fancy box, so they never really went much higher than that. Though I just think as a historical thing, it's always interesting to see that the high price games were round about there, and if you switched over to say the console and the cartridge market, it was £35 to £40. Suppose it's sort of interesting that game prices haven't really changed much in 20 odd years. They've creeped up with inflation and things and whatever, all that magic happens in between, but that price point has always hovered around £35 to £40 depending on the system. Anyway, sorry, that was just a weird aside, but the money side of this always seems to interest me, especially when you consider that something like RoboCop was a real big budget title when it came out. Now, the coder behind the game was Peter Johnson. He did games like Arkanoid, that's a very good title, I did have that as a kid. Daley Thompson's Olympic Challenge, I think that's a joystick basher, what the hell was that about? Morph, Trolls, Winter Super Sports 92, and an ever classic Whizball. He also did the graphics and the music. Wow, he had his hand in everything and no one else was involved. That's even more impressive. By 1989, Ocean had already begun its relationship with movie companies, and in particular like the movie license tie-ins, when Gary Bracey, who was the main lead for stuff like this, came across the RoboCop script. And with it being like a strong mix of science fiction, guns, action, set pieces, you know, it seemed ideal to adapt into a game. Just think about that for a moment. It's everything you would want from an action action title, really, isn't it? Not just all the crazy stuff that happened in the film, but just the fact you've got things like the gunfights and the car driving scenes. And although the main game doesn't use anything with driving, I'm very sad to say, the fact that it offers the opportunity to come up with all these different scenarios. The license cost Ocean just tens of thousands of pounds. It really was a drop in the ocean, especially at the time. Movie companies hadn't really caught on to what could be done with like the licensing and how games could develop and grow things as time went on. Now, the movie itself had a very low budget. It wasn't expected to be huge, and the fact that it became so massive later on, and it really did become a hit. It was everywhere, you know. I think it was #1 in all sorts of worldwide charts, and they definitely made their marketing budget back on this one. Compared to films like today, it was probably the equivalent of a low-end Marvel film, something like Iron Man 2. No, maybe that's not going far enough, because isn't that a $1 billion film? Them Marvel numbers are absolutely crazy at the moment. Half the time I don't know what the hell's going on. But RoboCop made them a lot of money, and in turn it made Ocean a lot of money as well. Gary Bracey, after reading the script, felt that the film as a whole was very similar in style to Blade Runner and would be the ideal game to sell to teenagers and the sort of market that they would want to appeal to. Now, Data East actually subcontracted the rights for the arcade game, and because of this, the Ocean logo can actually be seen in the arcade cabinet's demo mode. Now, they also did this weird deal where Ocean converted the coin-op to like home systems and devices. They ported it to everything, and it was very lucrative and essentially lucky that they managed to get their hands on it. Looking into it, it seemed that the film company Orion and the film's director Paul Verhoeven weren't very protective of the film's rights, and they pretty much let Ocean do whatever they wanted to do. Now, they were actually giving them some early footage of the film, but as they were using Data East's arcade cab for the general idea of what to do, they didn't really need it, and so Gary Bracey was able to actually see the film's Murphy death scene uncut before it was changed for the final release. I'm glad they did in a way. I think I've seen the director's cutscenes, and no wonder I was terrified of the theatrical version. It's even worse on the Blu-ray uncut edition. The game itself has lots of different level types. You've got things like the photo fit, the platforming shooting sections. Now, Ocean did this sort of thing because they wanted to make their own mark. They weren't just after a straight port of the arcade, and it later became the standard way of most of their movie tie-in games. You know, why change a popular formula? You're making a lot of money off this style of game. You know, it works for things like Batman, The Untouchables. It was very popular, and let's be honest, they were a business. They were in this to make money. Now, it was such a huge success that it quickly sold well over 1 million units across all of the different formats, and it gave them a huge foot into the US market, and because of this, it put the company into the big leagues. I mean, effectively making them the sort of EA or Ubisoft of its day, I suppose, for the 80s and 90s. The 16-bit versions were released slowly after the original 8-bit ones. Now, this was to help boost prolonged sales. There are actually 2 Amiga sequels, with the third being worthy of an episode of its own, I think, especially because it's all based in this 3D world. I will admit I have dipped into this slightly and had a play around with it. I couldn't get very far though, so it's one of the main reasons it's just not been covered so far, but we will return to it, I promise. The first one was a massive hit. It absolutely stormed sales charts, and it was a huge hit for years, especially when they re-released it later on, like in a budget label. But sadly, none of the sequels ever achieved the same sort of success or the amount of sales figures. But I suppose if you've got things like free games, you know, RoboCops 1, 2 and 3, you've got fancy box sets, and maybe it's not too difficult to knock different ones out. And I think with the third one, they did something very interesting with a copyright thing. Now, that's only a quick brief of what it is. I'll go into that when we do an actual proper episode. I don't want to spoil the details of it. Now, the VHS release of this, which was very different for the time, even had an actual advert for the computer games, which of course helped boost the sales of them no end, and it's probably what drove kids to want it so much and all that craze. I think maybe that's why I managed to see it at the time. I'm not even sure why my craze started with this film. I mean, I blame the toy companies because I had all the figures when I was a kid. I know, what the hell, how did that sort of a film manage to appeal to kids? I don't know what was going on with action movies back then. It's not something that happens these days. But given half the chance, I bet you any money these companies would love to get their hands on that kid market again. Now, it was ported to the Amstrad CPC, Apple II, that one did surprise me, Atari ST and the E, Commodore 64, the MSX, Game Boy, NES, PC version, I think that one was DOS, the Spectrum one, in fact I did actually play the Speccy one as a kid, IBM PC Junior, and the Tandy TRS-80, I think. Is that like a small calculator one, or is it an actual computer? Answer in the comments because I'm not entirely sure. Now, I'm pretty sure you don't really need me to tell you the story of the movie. By now, everybody must have seen that film. If you haven't, my god, go and see it. It's still amazing. It holds up really, really well. But we'll have a look at the game story anyway, and what's in the manual at least, and it goes... Patrolman Murphy was the 32nd cop to be gunned down in Detroit since Security Concept Inc. took control of the police department. It was the opportunity OCP had been waiting for. They took what was left of Murphy and turned him into a deadly killing machine with a reinforced titanium body, an erased memory and a programmed mind. However, they could not completely wipe out the memory of his horrific ordeal, and he sets out to track down the gang responsible. In this game, you are RoboCop. You are the future of law enforcement. That's a very, very light version of what actually happens in the film. They've not gone into that in any sort of proper detail, so I'm not sure what's happened there. Anyway, the game itself consists of this weird metallic robot-like surround with fuses, circuits, and the word RoboCop stamped across the top to remind you of what you are playing. You know, this is very much the 80s, and it's very 80s futuristic tech. Now, beneath that, to the left, is your score and the time remaining for the level. The main game takes place in the middle of the screen in a sort of reduced view. Again, it's got that surround going round. It's just something that a lot of games at the time seemed to do. You've got a power bar at the bottom for health, you know, your current weapon with a number for the ammo. Your main gun when you get to use it is infinite, but obviously when you pick up different weapons throughout the game, they've all got a total of bullets that you can use. It's very basic, but it's very functional for this sort of a game. Now, the controls consist of 8 different directions with simple left, right, crouch and move. The weapon up or diagonal, again, which can fire when you press that to shoot. It's very, very simple. If an enemy is close to RoboCop, then you will actually punch him in the face, or you can duck down and punch as well if you want to. It depends how in there you want to go. Pressing down and then up on the joystick will actually make you jump up. But he's a very big, very strong, metallic, robotic sprite, and also slow at the same time. So it's not really a good idea to be bouncing up and down like Mario all the time, because you're just going to get a good pasting. Unless, of course, the coast is clear and you can go as wild as you like. RoboCop as a character does look just like he does from the film, with the main sprite showing off his size, though graphically the game is quite basic, I'm a bit sorry to say. It doesn't have a lot of details, and it sort of kept reminding me, it's a very bad thing to say I know, of the Double Dragon style. Again, that almost felt like 8-bit graphics ported across, and I get that similar sort of vibe from this. Though I don't think it was lazy, because you look at things like Batman later on and they made more of an effort to match the movie. But at the same, and then again, did Batman come out later? I'm not sure now. Which was first, RoboCop or Batman? So one must have inspired the other. I'm sure that RoboCop came first. It does have that vibe though, more of being an advanced C64 game. though this was quite early, I suppose, in the Amiga's life, and it's sort of perfectly understandable. I've not really got any complaints about it. It does the job. It's got a small mix of super weapons thrown in there. They're available at different points. You can just collect them. You got things like flamethrowers, but they're all limited weapons, rockets as well. You get like 12 on some shots. It's nothing. You can get more ammo as you're walking around, though to be honest, most of the game you're just going to be using the main pistol. Though it is a sort of port of the arcade cabinet, it does differ greatly because there's a lot of different stage types in there. There's actually 5 main stages, all of which involve walking, punching, and shooting your way through the baddies, which always lead and turn to a boss. These are often quite large and they tend to follow a very basic set pattern, and often it's just a matter of watching them, hanging back and learning what they're up to and sweeping in at the weak points. They also tend to move at a fair old pace and are often very, very quick and much faster than Murphy, so a lot of the time it's more of a power battle to survive these. Now, between each of the main stages are these weird bonus rounds, I don't know what else to call them, which come in the form of shooting galleries, and by that I mean things like you'll have a hostage with someone walking behind them and you have to move the cursor. You do this with the joystick, and there's also one in like the police station and you've got targets popping up. Very, very simple stuff. There's also computer ID photo fits thrown in there, which are sort of this neat ideas, and they do actually use, I think, the programmers' faces or team from Ocean, and it does add a bit of variety beyond the main platform punching and shooting sections. It's a great change of pace whilst you're playing. Now, there's brief bits of text and these weird sort of TV reports. They always seem to remind me of CNN ones, which tell the story in a very limited fashion. They are very, very brief and they're never more than a paragraph, or they don't really go into it in any sort of detail. Now, RoboCop's main theme plays throughout all of the main levels. It's a good rendition. It doesn't sound sampled like, say, what Double Dragon did, which was very, very briefing, although it does play constantly throughout most of the levels. Now, there is different music, at least for the bosses. It's usually very intense and quite exciting, as it should be because it's a boss section. Of course, you've got, I didn't say this before for the bosses, ED-209 is in there. It's all stuff from the film, so it's all referenced in there. It's quite a good movie tie-in in that sense because it's a good representation of what's actually in the film. Now, throughout the entire game, there's lots and lots of good sound effects for things like guns, punching. There's even voices in there, and I think it's the coder does the main voice as well. He does a very good impression of RoboCop, though if you listen to it for too long, which I had to do whilst I was practicing for the show, it does stand out a bit. It's not as good as the original, but it would probably have been too expensive to go. Was it Peter Weller to do the voices? I don't know. Isn't that terrible? And I love that movie. I can't remember his damn name. The great thing about it is, though, it captures the sound and the feeling from the film, and it does draw you in whilst you're playing, and it feels like RoboCop should feel. It's slow, it's clunky. He is a powerhouse, and that does come across quite well. And a lot of that is really down to the amazing sound work, so that's a definite plus for it. It's that time of the show where we need to move on to the game's problems. Now, first of all, it's a real shame that even though I like the sound and the amount of stuff they've got going on there, that they couldn't actually use sampled voices from the movie. Now, I understand why they didn't, because it was all to do with the timing and they'd not even got the film on release. They'd only seen bits at this point, though it would have been really nice for them if they'd maybe got a few more weeks, I don't know, a couple of months to include them, or maybe got some more music from the actual movie rather than have the same thing playing constantly through levels. It's just a bit depressing, really. And the music on level 1 plays on every single walking stage, and it's just a bit disappointing. Now, the game itself is very slow and plodding to move, and in turn that sort of makes it quite difficult because you're not moving super fast and everyone's much quicker than you, so you have to be very accurate. And because of this, parts of it do feel damn right unfair. facing off in particular against ED209 at the end of level 1, you can't move fast enough or even jump out of the way to dodge the incoming bullets, so it just becomes more of a slow slugfest to wear down his energy, and a lot of the time you're better off just running right up to him and blasting away like crazy and hoping that your actual energy lasts. But in the arcade version of this fight, it's much better because I think there's a gap down the left of the screen where you can sort of avoid him, and it gives you more reaction time and you're able to avoid it to some degree. Though that might be my memories, so apologies if I've got that wrong. Now the game itself feels a bit sluggish to control. That does make sense though, because he's a robot, he's robotic, he moves in that style, but at the same time the arcade cabinet manages to capture that feeling a lot better. He's a lot quicker to move, you feel a lot more powerful than you do in this, and the enemies are all very quick and nimble and you're very slow. You don't feel like you've got pinpoint accuracy that you should have from this souped up machine, and it feels a lot like Sega's eSWAT game to control, and that's a very mixed bag to be honest. I didn't really like the arcade version of that, but I always go back to the Sega Mega Drive one because it's a lot of fun, and to me as a home port that's always felt like a bit of a better RoboCop game, and it's ripping it off really, isn't it? It's obvious. Now, when it comes to the walking levels, it's a real shame that there's not much variety. It's a pity they don't give you any sort of chance to explore more. The levels are completed quite easily. It's all a single path to get through. There are points I think where you get to walk up and down certain sections, but you're not going to different floors and all parts of the building. It's all very straightforward. And also, you only get one life unless the versions I were playing were broken. And there's no continues either, and there's zero options to add more. I did have a good look, but I couldn't find any real cheats that would help you get past this, though I was watching a few walkthrough videos of the later sections of the game, and the guy seemed to be invincible, so I don't know what the hell happened there. There must be something out there to get through all of it. Let's move over to the magazine reviews. Now, CU Amiga gave this 81%, The One gave it 80%, Amiga Format, this is more like it, gave it 73%, Amiga Action were a bit unfair with 58%, and then on re-release, Amiga Power gave it 32%. Now, I will say I don't understand that score. It's nowhere near that level of badness, so I don't quite understand that score. Though with it being a budget re-release, maybe they were just comparing it to other games available at the time, so maybe it's understandable. I don't know. As a moving license title for 1989, it's perfectly functional. It certainly gets the job done. It's a nice enough movie tie-in. It's got all the actiony bits. It's got the different stuff in there to keep you entertained and keep you coming back for more. Although I didn't like the really high difficulty. A lot of the reviews seem to think this was quite easy. I suck at games and I did try my best and I really did struggle with this. A lot of that was down to it being a bit unfair at times, and it means, again, you'll probably have to use cheats to get far in it, unless of course I just suck at games. Now, the different sections throughout the game do represent the film pretty well, but as a game it just seems like it doesn't do enough. A few more tweaks to the controls and the difficulty might have put it on par with the Batman the movie game. It's a shame they didn't add like a driving section, as that could have worked really well. It did for Batman, especially with that flying section. Again, RoboCop doesn't fly. It's not the third film where he's got the jetpack, of course, though that cop car in the film is quite a big thing. It appears in lots of sections, and I would have loved to see just a level dedicated to a Chase HQ style behind the car driving section. Again though, it's quite early, so they weren't really doing that sort of thing at the time. Overall, this isn't a bad game by any means, and I guess people would have been satisfied well enough back in the day with it. It just could have been so much more. I mean, I love Batman the movie. It's a great game. It's the perfect movie tie-in title for me, and this could have been just as fondly remembered as that. Though they just needed to go a bit further, a few tweaks here and there, sharpen it up a bit, maybe change the level around, add a driving section. Again, I'm probably asking too much for the time, though I always want more. It's a good enough tie-in, I suppose, though it's sadly lacking in a few areas, and it just sort of pushes it towards the bottom of the other movie tie-in games that Ocean did. Again, you might like this one, it depends on preference, but for me, it just didn't do enough. And I'm afraid that's your lot for this week. Remember, if you want to comment on anything I've said today, you disagree, or just want to comment on the show in general, you can do so over on the Facebook page, which is facebook.com/AmigaRama, the Twitter account, which is @AmigaRamaPod, or even just drop me an email, which is effectively snail mail these days, lefarius@AmigaRama.com. And of course, we have to send out a huge thank you to the Patreon supporters. If you want to join this team of irregular soldiers, just come along to patreon.com/AmigaRama. And those amazing Patreon supporters are Adam Bradley, Darren Coles, Figgy CTZ, Graham Vebke, Glenn Milford, Jason Warnes, O'Brien's Retro and Vintage, Retro Ravi, Richard Legg, Sneff and Treble. Until next time, guys.